Ableton. You probably saw all the plugins on the side of the window and didn't know what half of them do. I know I did. But today we're gonna break them all down in depth. Let's go. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, Chris here. So today's video is basically just an in-depth video to all the Ableton plugins. Now, please bear in mind, this is a part 2 video. You can click on the part 1 video up here, and that I basically just break down all of the plugins as an audio demo. There's no talking, it just runs through all of the plugins. Whereas in this video, I'm gonna go a bit more in depth explaining how I tend to use some of the plugins, what the different controls do, as well as explaining some of the plugins that don't actually make sound, but are more utilitarian kind of plugins. I should mention, when I was creating that video, I realized that it was going to be way too long if I included both of them, so I've split up the videos, hence why I'm wearing a different shirt now to what I'm going to be wearing in a second. But if you enjoy this video, please subscribe, leave us a comment below. I'd love to know what you guys thought about it, and with that in mind, let's crack on with the video.
There's a lot of different things you can achieve with all of these sounds. Also, just bear in mind, I've got the full version of Ableton or whatever, so if you have the Lite or the Standard, you might be missing a couple of these, but hopefully the plugins you already have, this video should give you a slightly better understanding of what they all do. Let's actually hear a bit of music through some of these, so I'm gonna quickly get up a nice synth patch that I've got here on the Polymax. Can't actually see, I've got a piano down here, but for the sake of whatever, you get the idea. So we've got a synth sound. I've recently become more of a fan of the Chorus-Ensemble for this. If you've got anything that's a little bit mono and you want to make it a bit wider, a bit more stereo, you can always use this Chorus and Ensemble. I really like it for just adding a slight texture to my sounds. Say you've got a bass, for example, something like this, the operator. I use it mainly as a sub in this case, but say I wanted to give that mono sub a little bit of width, I can just go in, flush this down. Now I've got something slightly more stereo. And in case you can't actually hear what I'm playing right now, you might want to listen on some headphones or some speakers just to get that low end. So this Multiband Dynamics, this is one that I didn't used to reach for too much until I found out they had an OTT preset. There's a plugin out there called OTT by Xfer, the same guys that make the Serum synth. I'm pretty sure it's a free plugin as well, so you can go check that out. But this basically replicates the kind of sound that it makes, which is really nice. I tend to chuck it on anything, whether it's vocals, it could be a whole mix, a keyboard sound or a guitar sound. And I just take that mix, pull it all the way back to 0, and then feed it in slightly, because it is such an over-the-top form of compression that you can leave it as it is, but just feed in a bit of it, and it really just adds something to the sound you're using. Say this string sound. Stick a little bit of OTT on that. It's going to sound quite outrageous. You get me? But then I pull that amount back to say 20%. And when we hear it off, awesome. So it really just adds something. It's not a plugin I would dive too deep into figuring out, because it's got all of these different controls. You can change everything. There's so much stuff to look at. But this OTT preset is one to hold on to. So what about distortion, saturation, overdrive, that kind of thing? We have a few options in here. We've got amp, we've got overdrive, saturator, pedal as well. There's a couple different features. I would even say cabinet, because it kind of works in context with the amp, but it's not really going to give you any drive, but it works hand in hand. And these are all giving you different flavors of distortion, whether it's something way super aggressive or something a lot more subtle. There's even that dynamic tube, which I forgot, because that's not one I tend to reach for. It's super subtle, but adds a nice little bit of warmth if you really need it. But personally, for me, if I'm going to reach for some distortion, I'll tend to go for saturator, because it's quite a straightforward, mainly one knob kind of distortion where you're driving and then just pulling back the output. My main use is on this sub that I use on Operator. Right now it's quite bassy. There's loads of low end in my headphones anyway. If I had to play this on a phone or a laptop speaker, it might not translate as well. So if I use Saturator to really drive it, right now I'm absolutely clipping my output, so I'm just going to turn that back down. But something like this will come through a lot clearer on your phone speakers than just a standard sine wave. So I tend to use Saturator for something like this where I just need a little bit more grit, and then again I can always blend to taste if it's too much, or if I'm purposely just overcompensating with the amount I'm using and then just pull it back to add a little bit something. Reverb, we got two types. We got the standard reverb and the hybrid reverb. Your standard reverb is just what it says on the tin. Get a synth sound going. You can hear pretty dry. If I get that reverb, bog standard reverb, you've got all your standard reverb controls, your size, decay, stereo, your dry wet, and then a couple of things to play with the actual shape of the room, such as your diffuse, your reflect. I don't want to go too deep into this because this video is gonna be years long. But moving on to the next one, we've also got the hybrid reverb, which maybe for some might be a bit easier to understand. Got a convolution reverb and an algorithmic reverb, whereas the standard reverb plugin we were just using is more of just an algorithmic reverb. What's nice about this, as it states in the name hybrid, it's using two of these different technologies of reverb, right? And what a convolution reverb is in comparison to an algorithm one is that a convolution is actually the process of recording what an actual room sounds like. Right? So if you get that room sound, I record it into my computer, and then using a little bit of software, I can capture that sound and use it on anything else. So in this case, we've got a bunch of different realistic rooms that have been captured, and each of these are going to sound slightly different. Say I go into a spring, can actually hear a bit of the springy character that's got going on. I actually really like this when I was going through on the drums. It sounded awesome. There's a folder particularly made for drums, which is great. I've got the blend to 100% on the convolution side, and it sounds like this. Sounds like a drum room to me. I'll pull the dry wet back a bit. And you know, between these two, it's adding a nice bit of a realistic room sound to these drums, which is great. And then I can even blend in, say I want a bit more of that algorithmic reverb, something a bit longer, a bit more to fill up the space, really. I can blend in a bit of that. Say that decay is too long, I'll pull it back, maybe even the size. So that's the algorithmic reverb. That's the convolution reverb. Can land somewhere in between. Like that, you've got a great combo of reverbs that just works really nicely together. Again, you have a lot of the same controls from the previous reverb plugin we checked out, except this has some vintage modes, which adds a little bit of texture, let's say. A little bit of bit crushing, downsampling. And obviously, as you get newer and newer, it becomes cleaner and cleaner. It's also got a little mono bass, which is good because if you're dealing with any types of sounds that need to have that bass be, center and not get too wild and reverb, you can just put that mono and we'll just keep everything below a certain frequency in mono. Compression. Not everyone's favorite topic because it can take a bit of getting used to actually understand the sound of compression. But there's a couple different compressors we have in here. In particular, compressor. And again, I'm not going to dive too deep into how these work because we're going to be here for a whole other video, basically. But I've got that, which generally works across the board on most sounds. And then glue compressor, which I find really works on drums. Bit less faff because you have all of these notched modules that you can select all of the appropriate settings for, and it's a bit less, you know, going through the weeds, just picking random numbers until it makes sense. Like this, you can figure out, okay, I want a fast attack or I want a slow attack. It's not going to these outrageous numbers, which maybe don't make too much sense in context, and just generally quite nice. You know, this is based off an old school compressor called the SSL bus compressor. And so if you had to use it in context like you would use this piece of gear, you might stick it on maybe the overall song, you might put it on your drums, a couple things that need a bit of punch. You could use it generally as your overall compressor as well. You also have the limiter, which is basically a really extreme compressor that basically just stops the sound passing over a certain level, a certain threshold. So all you have is a gain and a release. And the ceiling is basically where you want to actually limit the sound to. So how loud do you want it hitting? You can obviously always change the volume from the fader, but this will be limiting from the plugin. So in this case, I can really smash these drums and make sure they're not going over, say, -2 dB. You can hear as I turn it up, the peaks aren't getting any louder, but the quiet parts are really coming up, and it's making this sound overall a lot fatter. I can use the release then to basically state how exaggerated I want this to sound. If it's a slow release, it's not going to be as in your face, whereas if it's a fast release, it's going to be a lot more punchy. So modulation. You've got a few different things for modulation. You've got your chorus-ensemble, you've got your phaser flanger, and you've even got these wild ones such as corpus, which is almost like a resonator module, and it makes it sound like your already existing sound is going through one of these items here, right? So say I pick the marimba. You can hear it's almost like the sound is being processed through this marimba, and I can actually put the dry wet to full. You can hear what it's doing. It's almost like a synthesized module, and I can pick any one of these different tools. Right, and we can get all of these wild effects. Delay, we've got a few different options for delay. We've got delay, echo, we've even got this filter delay, which is kind of like a multi-tap delay. The most straightforward one, I would say, is just delay. Just is what it is. It's got a filter here, so if you want your delays to sound a bit darker, you can use the filter accordingly. You've got your delay times here. If I want it to be slower or faster, I can select that there. If I want the delay to bounce left to right, I can turn on the ping pong. And I even have a little bit of modulation. So say here I can set the rate. If I want the filter here to slightly move around like this, I can give a small percentage of that to the filter. You can hear the filter on the delay slowly open and close. And I can do the same with the time. So the delay actually kind of varies in pitch slightly. You can hear what that's doing. Echo is more like a tape delay, which gives you all of the fun pitch shift sounds. Right? But what's nice is they've also included a reverb in this, so if you want your delays to fall into a reverb sound, you can even pick where this reverb sits, if it's before the delays, if you want it to feed back through the whole thing. Really nice few options, and then a small decay, so not super complicated. So again, you've got some fun features in this, such as the same wobble that we had in the previous delay module, where you can set an amount for the pitch to change. You can even duck, so say you had a singer and this echo was on their voice, you could set a threshold where when they're singing, the delay is down, it's quiet, and then when they stop singing, it opens up and comes out. You can even add some noise and a gate just to again tweak the sound slightly further, or make it, you know, either have it come in a certain moment and not be there otherwise. You can use a combination of all these things, as well as a modulation tab just to play with all of the modulation characteristics, the time, if they're intertwined with different types of modulation. It's all easily accessible. And then the filter delay, this gets slightly more complicated, but all the tools are the same. You have all of your delay times here, where you can add a little bit of swing, you know, a little bit of delay to that time per se. You can pan said delays. You have 3 to pick from. And then here's your volume on each. You also have your feedback just to set how long the delay is actually going on for, as well as each of them having their own little filter module. So each delay can sound slightly different. We've got grain delay. Pick another instrument for this. So right now we're on 100% wet, so there's actually a bit of a delay from me playing, but if I pull that back, very standard delay. I've got my delay controls here. But where it gets really wild is where I start to get these controls involved. Say some spray. And the pitch. So I put that to 12. Random pitch. Add some feedback. So you can hear all of the crazy granular delay sounds I've gotten this. Super wild. Here are some more wild options that we have. So things like resonators, spectral time. These things are doing more of like a granular kind of sound, except the resonator, where the resonator is basically taking every hit and almost applying it to a pitch and actually resonating that certain frequency. So in this case, so as you can hear, the drums have a note now. And I can pick what that note is. And then I can add other notes and actually generate a chord. If I put the dry wet to full, you can hear the sound we've got. So it's still got a bit of the character of the drum beat in there, but it's mainly now become this resonating instrument. So moving on from the resonator, we've also got the spectral resonator and spectral time. They do some pretty wild effects. We'll continue using this drum beat and we'll pick a couple of presets. There's this one called Drum Snow. Or Lowrider Drums. And that's so cool. But there's loads of options to select from, so this might take a little bit of figuring out what's going on here, but otherwise presets can get you a lot of the way there. Spectral time, kind of similar, kind of different. It has this freeze module, which is really cool for getting some certain types of sound effects. I quite like this retrigger actually, because then it can actually retrigger depending on the input coming into the plugin. So say I turn this on. You can hear loads of crazy stuff going on. So now I think it's time to give the special mention to some of the plugins that don't actually make any sounds but are still pretty convenient, such as Envelope Follower and LFO. Some of my favorite tools to use because these actually control plugins. So I'll get the Envelope Follower, I'll get the LFO, and you can see the LFO just moves like an LFO. I can pick the rate if I want it to slow down or if I want it to speed up. But what's really nice is these two plugins, I can use them to control features on other plugins. One thing I really like to do, for example, is use LFO on erosion. You can hear it's not doing too much, but what I can do is I can put this map onto the frequency and it just moves around like the LFO is controlling. But what's really convenient is I've got all of these different shapes in here, so I can actually get it to react in different ways. I can put it on something like random, set this rate to be time synced with the tempo and put it on, for example, 16ths. Or maybe even 30-second notes. Say I copy this over to that synth patch I was just using earlier. Now we've got this. I can pull that amount back. Really cool. I can even use something like Utility. Again, another plugin I haven't mentioned yet, but we'll get into it. But this has a pan control. So say I want this sound to pan randomly. I can go into here to get a different map mode and put it on pan. And now this sound is going to pan accordingly, even matching what erosion is doing basically. Really cool, you get some really interesting sounds from this. But say I don't want the plugin automation to be automatic like the LFO is doing. I want it to be a bit more triggered from the actual input of the sound. I can use this envelope follower. I could put it on something like the amount, for example. And now every time we get a hard hit coming on into that input, it will affect the module we have selected, in this case the amount. I can change the gain, how much that's affecting it. I can pull it back. I can even set the minimum and the maximum of where I want this to fall roughly. If I want this sound to change in pitch slightly, I can put it also on the frequency of this. And say I want it to be a bit more in the middle, so I can set it to about 47%. So you can see plenty of control just over these two plugins that make no sound. So now that we've mentioned it, I should get into utility. It does very little, but also so much. It's a king of being a utilitarian type of plugin. Say I've got some automation going on the volume of one of my tracks, like so. Say this is the volume automation, right? And you can see here as it plays through, this is going to change. And actually I can make that a lot finer. So I had something like this. So you can see this is all playing through, the volume is changing here. But say I wanted to make a subtle volume adjustment, I could go into this, just change the volume of how much it's going in. Maybe I need the bass to be monoed. Let's go a nice little bass mono section right here where I can just mono the low end. Say I want to mono the whole thing. Say I want to listen to my mix in mono. I can stick this on the master, which I actually find myself doing this quite a bit, and I'll just click mono. So it gives me an instant mono version of my mix. You can also flip the phase on the left and right sides. You've got a couple different options on what you're actually listening to. And then as well, just an additional balance or pan and your gain, plus a mute. So you can actually use this as a pretty convenient automation tool. So I want something to go from mono to stereo. I can use this as a little automated module. And bear in mind, if I want to listen to just the sides, I can actually push this to 200% or 400% in this case. And that's just going to play the side information. It's not going to make it wider. It's just going to give you what is actually the information on the sides of the speakers. Other little random plugins, these are kind of the last of the list by this point, but we've got vector delay and vector map. You can see there's a lot of craziness going on right now, but basically vector delay is again another delay to add to the list. Sounds like this. But what's nice is it's got this automated circle moving, and we can actually change a couple of the features of this. I can change the voices. You'll see if we click, they reset. And here we can even add different modules such as this attractor, and it gives these, look at this. So it gives these modules different ways to react to the sound that we're providing. And you can hear the craziness that this brings with it. And then what's nice is you can take this technology and you can basically map these to, again, certain controls. Say I had the resonators, I wanted to map this to one of the notes. Say I want to get this one to here. Loads of craziness. Your tuner, always convenient. Tell you what note you're landing on or if your instrument is in tune. Spectrum just gives you a very good analyzer for what you're listening to. Right? If you needed to check it on the whole mix or whatever, you've got a couple of different options to change, like the refresh rate, the average, the lines or whatever. You've got a lot of different features, but mainly just visual. You've got the looper, great little performance tool where I can actually resample this. I can go in, change the speed, reverse the sample. So you can use this really as a powerful tool. I have a guitar pedal that I use for looping, but all with these similar kind of controls, and to create some extremely wild samples, this can be really convenient. You can map all of these controls, start, stop, record, overdub, all that stuff to a controller, and then you can use this as a really powerful tool to play around with. Got external audio effect. I can't really demonstrate this right now, but basically if you had like a guitar pedal or something you wanted to send out from your interface into this tool and then back into your computer in one easy manner, you'd slap this effect on your track. You can send the audio to a certain output, bring the audio in to one of the selected inputs, and then you can just process it accordingly. You have some volume, some gain, and then your dry wet, as well as some hardware latency if there is any. But super convenient to use any hardware inserts basically. Audio effect track, this can be quite convenient if you wanted to stack numerous effects. Say I wanted a limiter and a filter delay before it and a drum bus. I wanted all of these things. And what I can do is I can go into this module here and actually have, say, a wet dry section. So if I duplicate this, I now have two different chains where, say I solo this chain, I can remove all of these plugins. And this can be my dry chain, call that dry. This can be the wet chain. I can put everything on fully wet, so basically as it is. And now that's my dry sound, that's my wet sound, and together can have a nice combo of the two. So I can actually create some pretty in-depth chains using this audio effect track. Another way to get this up without actually selecting the rack, let me just take out these plugins for the time being and delete that, is if I selected all of them, I could press Command G to group and it sticks them in an audio effect track right there. So I've got Shaper, kind of similar to an LFO, but say I wanted to, for example, create almost like a sidechain effect. This is just giving me a constant shape that I can apply to any plugin. So say I want to apply this to the gain and I don't want it to go to 100% because then that is like a crazy amount of volume. I want to create this ducking effect. So now I've got this ducking, this utility volume here. We've got this. In this sense, it's working as a pluck because it's coming down like this. If I flip this over to the other side, maybe I'll give it a little bit of a fade in or a fade out. Super convenient. So last but not least, I just want to talk about Drum Bus because this is probably my most used plugin in Ableton, stock plugin anyway. And it really just does what it says on the tin. It works amazingly on drums. I've used it on other things, but I always come back to using it on drums because for this particular reason, it just really does a good job, you know, it does really well. So you've got two different types of saturation. You've got drive and a crunch. You've got this damp, which is kind of like a high filter to take off any excessive, uncomfortable, bright sound. This transient shaper either makes your sounds really tight or just really open and compressed and loud, as well as having an additional compressor here, which you can adjust the volume going into it from this trim module here. And then lastly, it goes into this boom section, which just adds a certain amount of low end, which you can actually specify the frequency here, but it will almost create a tone. It's not just adding low end, it's creating a resonance in that peak. So let's dive in it really quick and then we'll probably conclude. So saturation. Say that's too bright, I'm gonna pull it down here. Say I want to tighten up those transients, or make them just really loose and wide. Let's pull back that saturation just so you can hear what this is doing. Compressor, obviously. Some nice additional bit of compression, but for me this transient control, whew. And then the boom, if I click on this you can audition the sound. And then pick a key. And here you can actually see the note that comes up. If I click on that, it will shift this slightly so that it actually falls on the specific frequency. Adding a lovely bit of low end to our drums. Sounds great. Woo! Okay, that's about it for today. This was a bit of a long one. At least it was a long one filming it. It's almost tomorrow by this point. But once again, thank you for watching this. If you enjoyed, let us know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you thought about all of these stock plugins. They're all super convenient, very useful. Got a lot of different effects to pick from. We didn't even dive into the MIDI effects, which I might save for another video just to save us a little bit of time and sweat. But don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and once again I've been Chris Vella, and I'll see you on the next one.